of April. Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Safety of Rwanda, Asylum and Immigration Bill, consideration of Lord's message.
Now, before we move to consideration of the Lord's message, I can confirm that nothing in the Lord's message engages Commons financial privilege. We will begin with the government motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 1D, with which we will consider the other government motions as listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 1D. Michael Tomlinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, here we are again. Thank you very much indeed, and I beg to move that this House disagrees with the Lords in their amendments. Madam Deputy Speaker, you were in the chair on the last occasion, and this House has now voted several times, not to mention the strong endorsement of the bill at second and third readings. We need to bring this process to a conclusion, to get the bill onto the statute book and to get the flights off the ground as soon as possible. Turning to the first amendment, the Lord's Amendment in New Amendment 1D has added in a number of Acts of Parliament and is simply not necessary. 3 lines, 3 acts have been added. So we should have due regard for the Children Act, the Human Rights Act, the Modern Slavery Act. Why stop there? Why not the Equality Act? Why not the Data Protection Act? Why not any other act? Why not have the whole statute book listed out there on the face of the document? The answer is because it is not necessary. The treaty, the bill and the evidence together demonstrates that Rwanda is safe for relocated individuals, that the government's approach is tough but fair, that it's lawful, it has justification and it seeks to uphold our international obligations. As I've set out in our earlier debates, the government respects the decision of the Supreme Court, and it's precisely to address those concerns of the Supreme Court that this government has brought forward the treaty with the Republic of Rwanda, as well as preparing an evidence pack on what has changed and how those concerns are being addressed. The government is now... Of course I'll give way to Lily.
I was struck listening to Lord Hope's amendment earlier today, that how reasonable it seemed setting up an independent body to assert what the Minister is saying, that Rwanda is a safe place. What could possibly be wrong with that?
Well, I'll turn to that amendment in a few minutes, but there already is an independent body. It's the Monitoring Committee, it's there, it's part of the treaty. That's not this amendment that I'm speaking to. I hope to allay some of her concerns, and I hope to see her in the division lobby in a few minutes. The short answer to her question is there already is an independent body. It's the Monitoring Committee, and hopefully she'll hear that in a few minutes' time, but I'm grateful to her for her intervention, because what the government is now doing is inviting Parliament, having considered the lengthy and extensive exchanges, Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout the passage of this bill, to agree with our assessment that the Supreme Court's concerns have indeed been properly addressed, and to enact the measures in this bill accordingly. Of course I give way.
Thank the Minister for we as a party will, with the exception of one of the amendments, probably indeed we will support the party tonight. I asked a question of the Minister in a previous engagement in relation to the freedom of religious belief. Because we have freedom of religious belief here in the United Kingdom, and there has been some disquiet expressed to me in my position as chair of the APPG for freedom of religious belief about the same freedom in Rwanda. And because of that, and because people have come back to me and asked me the same question, can I again ask the Minister very sincerely and very graciously to answer that question? Is there the same freedom of religious belief in Rwanda that we have in the United Kingdom? Thank you.
Well, I don't think I can tell the honourable gentleman that any system, any two countries' systems are the same. I can repeat the point that I've made before, that it is there within the Constitution. Those freedoms are there within the Constitution of Rwanda. And I'll get to him the precise wording, because he has asked me that question before, and I've read out the precise wording to him before, but I will endeavour to do so again before the end of this debate. Of course I give way.
Very grateful to the Minister. Many people share the government's ambition to stop the boats Is it the case that these Lords' amendments would muddle the legislation in a way which would leave us open once again to unnecessary court challenge? And can you reassure us that the bill unamended would do the job?
I'm very grateful indeed to my right honourable friend. I know he's taken a close interest since the outset of this bill, and he's right. The amendments fall into two categories: those that are simply unnecessary and those that are worse than unnecessary. They're wrecking amendments. They're deliberately put in order to prevent the very things that the bill was designed to do, namely to stop the boats and to get the planes off the ground. But as my honourable friend, the member for Stone, reminds us, the approach that's adopted in this bill, and he did comment that I've been repeating myself from time to time. My honourable friend has been accusing me of repeating myself, heaven forfend. But he is right, because the approach taken is justified as a matter of parliamentary sovereignty. It is justified in terms of constitutional propriety. Indeed, my right honourable learned friend has even said it's not unprecedented, and he's right about that. And it is in relation to our international obligations as well. May I turn to... Of course.
Well, may I reciprocate his comment? Because insofar as I may have suggested, rather infelicitously, that my honourable friend was repeating himself, I have to confess that I too have repeated myself. And I've done so for I have done so for extremely good reasons, because I believe that the amendment which I put forward, which I won't go into now, which got a huge amount of support in the House, but was not accepted by the government at the time, still presents a serious question which has to be answered. And that is, to go back to what my old friend, the member for Wokingham, mentioned just now, there is going to come a time when this bill goes through, hopefully in the immediate future, at which the matter will then become a bill turned into an act by royal assent. At that very moment, a claim is going to come straight in from Matrix Chambers or from one of the other Doughty Chambers or whoever, as sure as anything, for claimants. And the question is then going to be, what is the Supreme Court going to do about this? And that is the subject on which I return over and over again. When we said, as I think my honourable friend knows only too well, that we were concerned that the bill would not work, it wasn't that we didn't want it to work, it's exactly the opposite. We want it to work, and I'm concerned still, at this moment in time, given the fact that the opposition is still going on about the issue of international law, that we are going to need to be sure that the words as used are clear and unambiguous in such a manner that the court will rule in favour of the government. If not, it's all over.
Once again, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention. He does have a tendency from time to time to repeat himself. He's admitted that, but he's right to do so, and he's mentioned in the past paragraph 144 of the Supreme Court's judgment, and he's absolutely right, and I can cite it in full. In any event, the principle of legality does not permit a court to disregard an unambiguous expression of Parliament's intention such as that with which we are concerned in the present case. And that has been, may I say, our joint endeavour to ensure that this legislation is clear and unambiguous. Turning now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the implementation of the treaty. On the issue of implementation, let me reiterate that Clause 9 of the bill clearly sets out that the bill provisions come into force when the treaty enters into force, and that the treaty enters into force when the parties have completed their internal procedures. We will only ratify the treaty once again with Rwanda when all necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty. And the Monitoring Committee, and I refer to our previous exchange, the Monitoring Committee will undertake daily monitoring of the partnership for at least the first 3 months. So this is daily monitoring for at least the first 3 months to ensure rapid identification of and response to any issues. This is the enhanced phase, and it will ensure that comprehensive monitoring and reporting takes place in real time. Let me give way first across the chamber, and then of course I'll give way to my honourable learned friend.
Very grateful. And will the Minister ensure that the report is laid before Parliament so that we can review that?
Well, the Monitoring Committee's work is independent. I'm going to develop my points in future. Commitments have already been made that there will be an update in Parliament. That was one of the amendments in lieu that was tabled and passed on the last occasion that we debated these things. But here and now and today, it is the right thing to do to push back on all of these amendments, which are either unnecessary or wrecking. I give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, and I very much appreciate the tone and manner in which he is approaching this difficult issue. But can you just help me in one matter? I understand his point that there are some amendments which might have the effect of delaying the bill or might give rise to challenges and delay the policy objective. But I'm troubled about why that should be thought to apply to Lord's Amendment 3, which is the one proposed by the noble Lord Hope of Craighead, very distinguished jurist, and proposing very moderate and unpartisan terms. Because the rub of what will happen going forward is perhaps whether or not Rwanda is safe. Now, Parliament can legislate as a matter of sovereignty to say it is, of course, but for it to be effective, we do have to deal with the fact that we have chosen to make ourselves judges of fact, but facts may change. And given that we have put in place the mechanism with the Monitoring Committee and the enhanced arrangements, all to the government's credit, I struggle to see what there is in the Hope Amendment that actually undermines the operationality of the bill, rather than perhaps helping it. Because if facts did change, wouldn't it be helpful to have a mechanism of that kind for us to be able to review it upon an informed basis?
Well, I too am also grateful to my honourable and learned friend, and I'm grateful to him for his engagement both in this chamber during previous debates and also with me outside of this chamber. I hope to persuade him over the course of the next few minutes on this specific amendment as to why, in fact, it is unnecessary. And I share his respect for the noble lord, as of course we all should. But I respectfully disagree with him that this amendment is necessary. And let me explain why. Because the implementation of these provisions will be kept under review by that independent monitoring committee that we have been discussing. That role was enhanced by the treaty, enhanced from that originally as envisaged. And the commitment from our friends and allies in Rwanda is evident given the progress that has already been made. And let me set out 2 or 3 concrete pieces of evidence to help my honourable and learned friend. On Thursday, the 21st of March, the Rwandan Senate passed their legislation ratifying the treaty. Secondly, the domestic legislation to implement the new asylum system has been approved by the Cabinet and is now with Parliament for consideration, and a complaints process has also been set up. This, plus the wider assurances around the training process, which will ensure the quality of decision-making and building capability within Rwanda's asylum system, all reaffirm and point to the fact that we have confidence in Rwanda's commitment to delivering this partnership and their status as a safe country. As is evident, Madam Deputy Speaker, from our numerous debates, Rwanda has a strong track record of welcoming asylum seekers and looking after refugees. And it's also been internationally recognised as generally safe and stable. May I just turn to a further piece of evidence, and that's in the world rankings. Because Rwanda's overall score in the World Justice Project's Rule of Law score has increased consistently. It's first in sub-Saharan Africa and it's 41st globally. In fact, it's higher than both Georgia and India that this Parliament has, over the very recent past, confirmed are safe countries as well. Those who are relocated to Rwanda will be given safety and extensive support as detailed and set out in the treaty. And I'm grateful to all the officials in Rwanda who have been working so hard on this. May I turn next to the Amendment 6D? And this is one that I do characterise as a wrecking amendment. It would simply encourage illegal migrants to continue to frustrate the system through lengthy legal challenges in order to prevent their removal. And it runs contrary to the core purpose of this bill. This bill strikes the appropriate balance of limiting unnecessary challenges that frustrate removal whilst maintaining the principle of access to the courts. And taken as a whole, the limited availability of domestic remedies maintains the right constitutional balance, the balance that we've all been seeking in this chamber between Parliament being able to legislate as it sees necessary and the power of the courts in order to hold the government to account. May I turn to the final amendment, Amendment 10D. Can I acknowledge, as I acknowledged during our last exchange, that this government recognises the commitment and responsibility that comes with combat veterans, whether our own or those who have shown courage by serving alongside us. I repeat, we will not let them down. Section 4 of the Illegal Migration Act enables the Secretary of State to specify categories of persons to whom the duty of remove will not apply. And once the United Kingdom's Special Forces ARAP review, which was announced on the 19th of February, once that has concluded, the government will consider how to revisit our immigration legislation and how to ensure that and how it will apply to those who will be eligible as a result of the review. Yes, of course I'll give way.
It's one thing to hear the Minister give the assurances he's given today, but the fact remains that we have been out of Afghanistan now for some time. There are and is considerable evidence that those who helped us and put themselves in danger as a result have not been able to get easy access to the United Kingdom and get immigration status. And therefore, why, if in the past, when the difficulty is quite clear that these people are facing, why, if the government has not dealt with it then, should we take assurances it will deal with them in the future? And this amendment is therefore necessary.
The answer is this, because this Prime Minister has placed around his cabinet table, sitting at the cabinet, my right honourable friend, the member for Plymouth Moorview, a veterans minister sitting at the highest level. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is somebody who has served our country, as there are many honourable and right honourable members across on both sides of this House. We will not let them down. That is the reassurance that has been given from this dispatch box and also in the other place by the noble Lord Sharp as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am an optimist as well. And I confess that, despite the optimism expressed by the honourable member for Aberavon on Monday, I too am an optimist. May I take this opportunity, perhaps in the optimistic hope that this might be my last opportunity during the passage of this bill, to thank all of the bill team in the Home Office for their extraordinary work. It's a team effort, but may I praise one who has gone above and beyond, whose voice I hope it recovers, and she knows who I'm talking about. But it's been a team effort. May I also thank the parliamentary clerks for their advice and assistance, not least in our Marathon Reasons Committee sessions. And may I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for always ensuring that I have been in order. But to conclude, we have made it abundantly clear that our priority is to stop the boats. We simply cannot stand by and allow people smugglers to control who enters our country and to see more lives being lost at sea. We have an obligation to the public and to those who are being exploited by criminal gangs to stop this vile trade and to protect our borders. Letting this bill pass now will send a clear signal that if you come to the United Kingdom illegally, you will not be able to stay. I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1D. Shadow Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to actually start by thanking the noble Lords in the other place for all the hard work they've done in trying to amend this bill, which we know is quite frankly a sham and a con. But I'd like to highlight the restraint that they've exercised, actually, because despite the deeply damaging nature of this legislation in terms of its impact on our constitutional conventions and our adherence as a country to the rule of law, none of the amendments that are before us today are seeking to wreck the bill or the unworkable, unaffordable and unlawful scheme that the bill is seeking to enact. Not one of them would prevent flights to Rwanda taking off. Not one of them would stop the government flogging this dead horse of a policy. Instead, they seek only to commit the government to the promises it has already made about who will be sent to Rwanda and to clarify the mechanisms that will underpin that process. Now, I note that ministers have claimed that there is tremendous and pressing urgency in all of this. But if that is the case, then why did the government forego the opportunity to use Monday the 25th and Tuesday the 26th of March for debates and divisions on this bill? Could it be because they needed extra time to scramble high and low for an airline that wanted to be associated with this unworkable, unaffordable and unlawful scheme? Or could it be because the Home Secretary is unable to decide who should be exempted from deportation to Rwanda? Indeed, it has been reported that the entire harebrained scheme has been given a red risk rating in the Home Office because of his dithering. Which brings me to the Permanent Secretary's comments at the Public Accounts Committee on Monday, namely that 40,000 asylum seekers are currently stuck in the truly Kafkaesque perma-backlog of inadmissible cases whose claims for asylum the government are refusing to process. 40,000 is an awful lot of flights required, Madam Deputy Speaker, given that the government hasn't actually managed to get one flight off the ground, and given what we know about the Rwandan government's capacity to process just a few hundred cases per year. So given that a maximum of around 1% of the asylum seekers who are in the perma backlog can be sent to Rwanda, what is the Minister's plan for the remaining 99% who are stuck in this indefinite limbo of his government's own making? Is the plan to keep them in taxpayer-funded hotels, maybe, of which hundreds are still in operation, according to what the other immigration minister said on Monday, despite the government's boasts? Or perhaps they'll have an amnesty, which the Conservative member for South Thanet warned about last year, and his colleague, the Honourable Member for East Shoreham and Worthing, warned about at that very committee. Well, we know what we would do, Madam Deputy Speaker. We would deliver our backlog clearance plan, surging the number of decision makers to process claims quickly, and set up our new returns and enforcement unit with 1,000 new staff to remove those who have no right to be here. It is quite frankly shocking that the number of foreign criminals being removed has dropped by a staggering 27% under the Conservatives, and also profoundly worrying that the number of failed asylum seekers being returned has plummeted by 44% in that time, with just 2% of small boat crossers removed since 2018. What a sorry state of affairs. Put our plan for a new returns unit together with our cross-border police unit to go after the criminal smuggler gangs operating in the Channel upstream, funded, of course, through redirecting the money that's being squandered on Rwanda. And that gets you a compelling and realistic plan, Madam Deputy Speaker. A plan that is based on hard graft, common sense and effective international cooperation, in stark contrast with the headline-chasing gimmicks, empty gestures and blank cheques that have come to define the way in which successive Conservative governments have broken our asylum system and lost control of our borders. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government's refusal to engage constructively with the other place on this bill is deeply disappointing, given that their lordships have simply been fulfilling their constitutional duty to revise and improve the draft legislation that we convey to them. The noble Baroness Butler-Sloss received a tiny concession for her commendable attempts to stop the government sending victims of modern slavery to Rwanda. But let's be clear, that concession was barely worth the paper it was written on. And it is utterly shameful that ministers are still refusing to accept the amendment in the name of the noble Lord Brown. Madam Deputy Speaker, we owe a debt of honour and gratitude to the Afghans who so bravely fought alongside British troops. Yep. And the idea that we might send them to Rwanda is simply unconscionable. But the noble Lord Brown's amendment is not only driven by a moral imperative, it is also underpinned by our national interest and by military logic, for the simple and obvious reason that the ability of our armed forces to recruit local allies will be severely constrained if this bill passes unamended. Turning now to the other amendments that are before us today, it cannot be repeated often enough that adherence to the rule of law must remain at the heart of our constitutional conventions and as a cornerstone of our liberal democratic values. It is therefore profoundly concerning that ministers continue to refuse to recognise how important it is for Britain to abide by these principles and to have this commitment on the face of the bill. I will give it.
The member for Aberavon, I just simply want to say to him, if I may, and to put it to him, that the rule of law includes the basis of sovereignty on which it is quite clear from one great jurist to another, right the way down through generations, that where an act of Parliament is clear and unambiguous in its wording, it is the duty of the courts, as my honourable friend the member for Mid-Dorset said just now with regard to Lord Reed's judgment, paragraph 144, it's the duty of the court to give effect to those words. That is the rule of law, not this confection which the honourable gentleman is generally producing time and again. And if I may say so, he's flogging a dead horse, not just once, because he keeps on saying it. He's repeated himself now 3 times. I've never seen a dead horse flogged so badly as by the honourable gentleman.
Well, taking lectures about flogging dead horses in the context of a debate about Rwanda really is quite extraordinary. If you wanted a definition of a dead horse, that's what this policy is. But we have had many exchanges on this point, and I enjoy my exchanges with the honourable member on this point. As I repeatedly say to him, yes, Parliament is sovereign, but Parliament must act with due care and attention and caution with regard to the opinions that come from our most eminent court, the Supreme Court. And in this case, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that Rwanda is not a safe country. So it is frankly a travesty that Parliament is seeking to undermine the rule of our judiciary in that way, and it raises deeply troubling questions about this issue of the rule of law. I will give way.
Where would the proposed returns unit send illegals to, and what if the countries concerned didn't want to receive them?
Well, I'm pleased the honourable gentleman asked me that question, because we get this point from the benches opposite about returns, but what I find fascinating is that when you look at countries like India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, which are clearly safe countries in principle, 80% of the applications from those countries whose asylum claims fail are not being removed by this government. For instance, the Home Office rejected asylum applications from 1,750 Pakistanis in 2023, yet Home Office data shows that just 620 people were removed to Pakistan in 2023, of which a fraction, a clear proportion of that would have been asylum seekers. Some may well have been foreign national offenders. So the key point here is that there are many, many countries where it is more than possible to be returning people to those countries, and the government is simply failing to do so. We also had an extraordinary question from my colleague, the member for Newport East, in Home Office Orals on Monday, where she talked about someone in her constituent who is a foreign national offender, who's been convicted of a sexual offence, and has asked to be voluntarily returned to his country of origin, and the Home Office has not facilitated and not been allowing to make that happen. So there is something going seriously wrong in terms of returns. 44% plummeted number in terms of failed asylum seekers since 2010, and I think we should be focusing absolutely on those countries with low grant rates, because that is where you can clear some of this backlog and return people to their country of origin when they have no right to be here. I will give way.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. I find it very interesting, his suggestion that all we need do is ask India for emergency travel documents and they will immediately issue them. Has he made any attempt to find out what the issues might be there?
The key point here is, as I've said, that under the last Labour government, returns were working. Now, a part of that, I would suspect, is based on proper adult grown-ups being in the room and having proper adult grown-up diplomatic conversations with the governments with which we mean to engage. And I think what we've seen over the last years with this government is a consistent commitment to burning diplomatic relationships with a whole range of countries, and when you burn those bridges, it makes it much more difficult to achieve what we need to achieve in terms of our own national interest. So what we are clear is that what we're clear on is that we've seen the government promising from that dispatch box a whole range of things, and the Lord's amendments on these rule of law issues before us are simply seeking to put on the face of the bill what ministers have promised. Why else are they rejecting the amendment in the name of my noble friend, the Lord Coker, which simply asks the government to commit to promises that they have made? Likewise, why not support the Lord's amendment in the name of the noble Baroness Chakrabarti, which allows ministers, officials and courts to consider whether Rwanda is safe for individuals on a case-by-case basis if the government supports the principle of appeals as ministers claim that it does?
Would I be right in thinking that because the noble Lord Coker has brought this forward in one shape or another several times, and it is central to this debate, in the light of what I said a bit earlier in my intervention, is the Leader of the Opposition supporting that amendment, and if so, why?
Well, for the simple reason that we simply want to put on the face of the bill an articulation of what has already been said by ministers from the dispatch box, and we feel that it is extremely important to underline this country's commitment to the rule of law. And clearly, he mentions the Leader of the Opposition. As an eminent lawyer himself, there are few that are more committed to the rule of law than he. And finally, if there is a parallel universe in which the Rwandan government is able to process asylum claims in a safe and competent manner, then surely it makes sense to verify that point and those measures that are set out in the Rwanda Treaty, and to verify that they have been fully implemented, and for the government's hand-picked monitoring committee to establish that this is the case. That is not an unreasonable request from the noble Lord Hope, and the government should therefore be supporting his amendment, precisely as the chair of the Justice Select Committee pointed out. He's no longer in his place, but as he pointed out earlier. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me end by saying that the British people are looking on at this government's attempts to continue flogging this dead horse, which seems to have become the metaphor of the day, of a bill with a growing sense of bemusement and anger. Because blowing £500,000 of taxpayers' money on sending 300 people to Rwanda is utterly mind-boggling. And it is equally staggering that £2 million will be spent per asylum seeker to send them to Rwanda. Madam Deputy Speaker, you could surely spend £2 million more effectively on sending the Prime Minister and his 4 predecessors on a one-way trip to outer space with Virgin Galactic. Or, Madam Deputy Speaker, perhaps the right thing to do would be for the government to drop this entire failing fiasco and instead to adopt Labour's detailed plan to repurpose the Rwanda money into smashing criminal smuggler gangs and ending the Tory small boats chaos. We know what this bill is really about. The former immigration minister admitted it in December. It's all about the Prime Minister getting, and I quote, a few symbolic flights off the ground before the general election. And this weekend, a civil servant confirmed to the Eye's Lizzie Dearden in the Eye newspaper that efforts are geared towards a single flight as proof of concept, I quote, calling it an election vanity scam. And that really does tell us everything we need to know. None of this is actually about dealing with the chaos that they have created. They've just focused on getting a couple of symbolic flights off the ground. It's letting the cat well and truly out of the bag. Everyone can see this Rwanda scheme for what it really is. Everyone can see this legislation for what it really is. And everybody can see this government for what it is. I think we need a new one, and so too do the British people. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sir Robert Buckland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, bearing in mind the very short time, I will do my very best to speak briefly. We have 4 messages from the Lords, 4 amendments. I can deal with them in short order. Amendment 1, I think, has no merit. I have not voted in that particular issue before, but today I will vote against it because I think you cannot perfect that mess of a clause 1. I won't repeat the arguments that I've put on that, and I really don't think that this amendment improves with increasing additions of various statutes, as my right honourable and learned friend said. So I think we should reject that. I agree also that Amendment 6, I think, is frankly a wrecking amendment. We know that the delineation of Clause 4 was specifically to deal with individual cases. It was a proper and right addition to this bill from the outset, which I think makes it compliant with the rule of law. And therefore that should be rejected. I won't repeat my arguments on Amendment 10. I do think that there's still a class of people who've served this country, who've been brave and who have exposed themselves to danger, who have not yet been dealt with. Many of them are in Pakistan, and I think that it would have been helpful to perhaps see an amendment in lieu to deal with that point, as my right honourable friend did with regard to modern-day slavery, for which I thank him. Can I say that I was pleased to hear about the detailed reference he made to the progress being made by the government of Rwanda to implement the provisions under the treaty. That is clearly the issue at the heart when it comes to Amendment 3 and Clause 2. He knows my concern about deeming provisions and the desirability of them meeting the reality of the situation, which is why I welcome his statement and the statement of the Noble Lord, the Advocate General in the other place, to say that this bill will not come into force until the treaty has been implemented. But I say this to him. I think he's conceded this properly. The amendment in the name of the Noble Lord, Lord Hope, is not a wrecking amendment. It's designed to make sure that there is a mechanism through which this place can either deal with the fact that Rwanda is a safe country, or, God forbid, if it ever deteriorated to a situation where it wasn't, that we wouldn't need primary legislation to correct this situation. Because at the moment, we would. And that is why I think having a provision in the second subclause of Amendment 3 to allow this place to be involved in a situation where Rwanda might no longer be a third country, a safe country, on the advice of the Independent Monitoring Committee, which of course is a creature of the treaty itself, set up under the treaty, as he has described. It's not part of the Hope Amendment to set up a new body. That's not its intention. I will give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable learned friend for giving way. He knows I share his reservations about the inability of this House to reconsider the matter of the safety of Rwanda under the current legislation. But isn't the problem with the Noble Lord Hope's amendment that the mechanism he describes gives to the monitoring committee the final say on the safety of Rwanda, because it doesn't give this House the opportunity to say, we've heard the advice of the monitoring committee, but we nonetheless believe that Rwanda remains a safe country for the purposes of this legislation. Now, he and I might think that that's a wholly unlikely scenario, but as a matter of parliamentary sovereignty, it must surely remain possible, should it not?
Up to a point, Lord Copper, I think on subclause 2, there will be leeway for the government to actually disagree with the advisory committee, which might advise that Rwanda is no longer a safe country, but in the opinion of the Secretary of State, it is. And then it would be a matter for Parliament to determine, and the trigger wouldn't come in to place. On the first subclause 7, I think he's on stronger ground in the sense that the words of the Lord's Amendment does relate to a statement from the Independent Monitoring Committee. But I'll say this to him. I have no problem with an Independent Monitoring Committee that has been set up by a treaty that has been agreed to by this government and by the government of Rwanda, which has come into force in our law through the constitutional, the CRAG provisions. And I think that, slightly inelegant though it is difficult to see perhaps another way to do this that could be conclusive and which could, I think, give certainty to all those who are involved in the operation of this scheme. My right honourable friend, an old friend at the dispatch box, knows that what I want to seek to do is to remove and reduce the possibility of legal challenge. I do not want to see this legislation becoming the subject of angst, sturm und drang, in either the High Court, the Court of Appeal, or, God forbid, the Supreme Court. We've been there, and we've seen the effects of what happened when the situation as of 2022 was determined on the evidence by the Supreme Court. He knows my views about that. However, whatever concerns I have about the Supreme Court in effect conducting a test on evidence, which I don't think is frankly what it should be doing, it is the Supreme Court to deal with the law of this country and to interpret the law of this country. That is the reality in which we operate. And I want to make sure that this bill doesn't end up in that same problem, which is why I think the Noble Lord Hope's amendment has strong merit. It clears up any doubt that there isn't a mechanism either for the executive or this place to either apply the provisions of the bill or to disapply them when the facts change. Let's make sure, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the reality keeps pace with the law and that deeming provisions, however attractive they might be, aren't used as a device to cut corners or to run ahead of ourselves in a way that will only, I think, cause problems, not just for the judicial system, but for the operation of this policy itself, which he knows I have consistently supported and will continue to support as an innovative and proper response to the unprecedented challenge of mass migration that the West is facing now. This is serious stuff. I want the government to get it right.
SNP spokesman Alison Thewliss.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'll start in order here with Lord's Amendment 1D in the name of Lord Coker. And the Minister asked why these particular pieces of legislation are things that the government ought to have due regard for. Why would we want to have due regard for international law and various acts, including the Children's Act, the Human Rights Act and the Modern Slavery Act? Well, I think the reason why we want to have due regard for these things is found in the front piece of this bill, which says, in the name of the Home Secretary, I am unable to make a statement that, in my view, the provisions of the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Bill are compatible with convention rights, but the government nevertheless wishes the House to proceed with the bill. The government is setting out to undermine our international obligations, so it is quite right for the Lords to insist that we should abide by our international obligations. That's the very least this government should be doing. And there are implications for children, for people who have been victims of slavery and trafficking, of people whose human rights are going to be abused. And the government should be paying far more due attention to this than it intends to do. Moving to Lord's Amendment 3E in the name of Lord Hope. I think there is significance in making sure that the Monitoring Committee can do its job and do its job properly, because it's not clear. It's not clear at all the circumstances in which Rwanda can be declared not safe. The Monitoring Committee is supposed to produce an annual report once a year, which then goes up the chain to the next committee, joint committee, but there is no mechanism within that for them to blow the whistle should something happen. There is no mechanism for them to say suddenly something has happened here and Rwanda is no longer safe. What happens in that circumstance? What happens to those recommendations? How does that become activated? And what then happens to those people that are in transit that the UK hopes to send to Rwanda? Exactly. There is no mechanism within this legislation, or that I can see within the treaty, because there's a 3-month delay within the treaty as well before anything can be annulled within the treaty that both parties need to agree with. So what happens should something untoward happen in Rwanda? And I referred to the action of the M23 rebels in my remarks earlier on in the week, which the Minister didn't refer to at all in his summing up remarks. What happens if something goes awry? We don't know. We are beholden to the assertion of this government that Rwanda is safe in perpetuity. There is no mechanism to remove that perpetuity of Rwanda being safe. And I would highlight also the experience of the Irish journalist Sally Hayden, an author and journalist. She wrote the book My Fourth Time We Drowned, and she has raised concerns about the mechanisms of scrutiny in Rwanda itself. She has raised concerns in the past about the treatment of refugees in Rwanda. She has visited the country on several occasions, but she was denied entry last month as she went to cover the 30th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide. And she believes, despite having to try to resolve this with the Rwandan authorities, she believes that the reason for her refusal of entry is precisely because she has criticised the Rwandan authorities and their treatment of refugees. Is that not something that should alarm all of us about the scrutiny of this bill, both here and in Rwanda? Exactly. And she has said, and I quote, "Proper scrutiny of the consequences of this policy are not possible because it is not a country with freedom of media and freedom of speech." Exactly. That is something that we should be deeply concerned about, because without that independence and that scrutiny, we cannot be certain that what is happening is Rwanda is what the government intends to happen in Rwanda, or indeed what the Rwandan government is telling us that they intend to happen in Rwanda. That freedom of press is crucial to that level of scrutiny outside of the supposedly independent monitoring committee. So I support this amendment. Furthermore, the Amendment 16, in the name of Baroness Chakrabarti, I support this amendment also, because what this does is stand up for the rights of our own authorities here to make proper decisions. It empowers our decision makers, our courts, as they should be empowered, to look at the evidence in front of them and to make proper decisions. What this government does is ask the judiciary, ask the immigration officers, ask tribunals, everybody within the system to engage in a legal fantasy, that they should ignore all evidence in front of them and believe that the government, when it says that Rwanda is safe in perpetuity. And I would remind, with reference to 1C in here, around refoulement, that Rwanda engaged in the refoulement of several persons during the negotiation of the treaty. Never mind any other time. They were doing this during the negotiation of the treaty. So again, we should be worried about that.
Hear, hear.
Moving to clause 10D, and the exemption for agents, allies and employees of the UK overseas. Now, we had the urgent question earlier on people from Afghanistan who are currently being yeeted out of Pakistan, and the Pakistan government apparently pleading that using Rwanda as some kind of justification for this behaviour. Now, this really indicates the ripple effect of what the government is doing here, that other countries are praying in aid of this legislation when they look to do things that we also have concerns about. And the UK earlier on, I raised the point that we've been waiting for 3 years for the UK government to get their act together on ARAP and ACRS. People should not still be waiting with uncertainty, with fear, with the prospect of being executed by the Taliban should they be removed back to Afghanistan. This is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable and unjustifiable that the government has done so little in 3 years to protect Afghans who served alongside our forces in Afghanistan. So I think the very least that the government could do is approve this clause, to say that those people that served with us deserve protection. The people that are coming on small boats because the government schemes have failed to protect them, that they should be exempt from being sent to Rwanda. The government is refusing to do so, and I think that is absolutely despicable. Now, with the best will in the world, these amendments are not enough. Even if we pass them today, the Rwanda bill is a turd which cannot be polished. It is absolutely disgusting and objectionable in every sense. I would ask also, will the Labour Party repeal this? Because this bill will pass, but will the Labour Party make one of the first acts, should they become the government, to repeal this legislation, or will they keep it on the statute books should they become the government after the election? I would like to have that on the record. I would also reiterate my concerns, my deep concerns, that this is state-sponsored people trafficking. Whichever way you cut it, you're moving people without their will to a country without their consent. That is people trafficking. And while they can't find any commercial airline to take these people, it's even more concerning that they are engaging an RAF contractor, air tanker, perhaps to render these people to Rwanda against their will. It remains the position of the Scottish National Party, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we oppose this bill in every single sense that we can. And I will vote against it, even in the reasons room behind your chair, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will vote against it at every opportunity given, because it is despicable and it does not stand in Scotland's name.
Hear, hear.
We have very little time left, so I have to put on a formal time limit of 2 minutes. Sir William Cash.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will simply say very briefly, first of all, I shall focus entirely on the Noble Lord, Lord Coker's Amendment 1D, which I've mentioned already in interventions. The problem with the wording that he has put forward in his own words during the debate is, I'm afraid, a problem of disingenuously mixing apples and pears. The fact is that and I do want to know whether the Leader of the Opposition is behind this as well, because it's much more substantial, this amendment, and its predecessor is much more substantial than it might seem. It's actually a change in Labour policy as well. Noble Lord Aberavon and Tony Blair, when he was Prime Minister, and Jack Straw all agreed that the sovereignty of Parliament, where words are clear and unambiguous, prevails. And the bottom line is that this is exactly what we're dealing with here. I applaud the idea of maintaining international law. I've never taken a different view. But when he compares the question of what's going on in the Middle East and the illegal war in Ukraine and the Houthis in the Red Sea, which he does in his speech, but fails to appreciate that that is a separate situation from this issue that I'm raising as a matter of principle and of constitutional propriety, because I'm saying that those are matters which are exclusively matters of prerogative, whereas in this instance we're dealing with an issue of sovereignty and the clear and unambiguous words that appear in the statute, as Lord Hoffman made clear when he distinguished between treaties and statutes in relation to the case of R versus Lyons, which I've referred to previously. So the position is basically simply this, that I stand by what I've said in the past on the subject. I sincerely trust that the court will agree that these words are clear and unambiguous.
Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, the Government's motion to disagree to Lord's Amendment 1D is a motion to disagree with the obligations that in relation to the bill, the Government have due regard for international law and the Children's Act, the Human Rights Act and the Modern Slavery Act 2015. If the Government are confident that the Rwanda scheme will be fully compliant with international law and the aforementioned domestic law, I don't understand why they would reject this amendment again. Lord's Amendment 3E, that motion to disagree to Lord's Amendment 3E would scrap the requirement inserted by the Lords that Rwanda be treated as a safe country only if and when protections contained in the treaty are judged by the Independent Monitoring Committee to have been implemented and to remain implemented. Surely Lord's Amendment 3E is an entirely proper and legal amendment if the Government deems the measure in its own treaties necessary. And given that members had no opportunity to debate the treaty prior to ratification, this amendment would at least provide some reassurance that the protections it contains are put into practice. Lord's Amendment 6D is a motion to deny individual grounds for legal challenge that the Republic of Rwanda is a safe country for the persons in questions or for a group of persons, or that there is a real risk Rwanda will remove or send the persons to another state. So the Home Affairs Select Committee has always been clear that there has to be the opportunity for appropriate legal challenge as a necessary part of our fair asylum system. I listened very carefully to what the Minister said with his future assurances about the specified category that could be used in the future. But I think Amendment 10D sets out very clearly why this should be included on the face of the bill and our obligations to those who have helped us and our armed forces overseas. And I think that this would be the right thing to add into the bill.
Rachel Maclean.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I was watching Aston Villa smash Arsenal on Sunday, my thoughts turned to today's debate, of course, because the Emirates Stadium, as Aston Villa fans will know, is, of course, sponsored by the Visit Rwanda scheme, and Arsenal plays with that emblazoned on their shirts. I strongly support the Government's position as set out by my honourable friend, the excellent Minister, for the reasons that he has articulated. But more than that, Madam Deputy Speaker, behind all these amendments and this ping-pong and the reasons room and this process, which is quite baffling to my constituents, lies a simple principle: is this Parliament sovereign or not? Of course, I believe I was sent here to this Parliament to make laws in the interests of my constituents in Redditch. They are a generous people. We have accepted refugees and given them a warm Redditch welcome from around the world, but in the interests of stability and security and protecting those British values and the culture that we all care about, they also ask that we enact measures to enable our country to control our borders. And this whole debate is really summed up by this whole concept of, are we in the West able to control our borders or not, because we all know this is going to get much worse. 100 million people are on the move. I listened to what the opposition spokesman talked about. He talked about having more grown-ups in the room and talking more nicely. Perhaps the people smugglers will listen to that and stop putting people in small boats. Somehow, I doubt it, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's complete and utter nonsense. We are sent here to make hard choices, not emote and do things that make us feel good in the moment. We have to stand on one side. That is the stand of the sovereignty of this Parliament and the people of Redditch. And this is the way, this bill, let's get Rwanda but done, we will stop these boats and we will make our country safer.
John McDonnell.
We're at that stage in the legislative process where sometimes government obstinacy overcomes rationality. And I think that's where we're at the moment. There can be no way in which these can be described as wrecking amendments. I wish they were, but they're not. 3E is simply using the government's own mechanism to ensure that Parliament has the opportunity, where exactly has been said opposite, when the facts change, therefore Parliament's judgment can change. Anyone who has any experience of the history of this region of Africa realises there is built-in instability, and therefore there may well be, I hope there isn't, but there may well be the need for us to come back to this matter. With regard to the 10D, the government's, the ministerial response on 10D was that to reassure us that don't worry, because there are a number of veterans sitting in the Cabinet at the moment. There was in response to my Northern Ireland colleague's question. There are a number of veterans sitting in the Cabinet at the moment that can reassure us that therefore the system in the future with regard to those who've served in Afghanistan will work. Well, I'm sorry, the veterans sitting around the Cabinet at the moment have not ensured that so far, and many of us have had individual cases dealt with, and all this does is ensure we live up to those commitments that we gave to those serving alongside us, putting their lives and their families' lives at risk, that they will be secure. And I'm sorry, the existing scheme hasn't worked in that way, and this will ensure it does in the future. Final point from me. I came here on the basis that Parliament was all about protecting its citizens and ensuring that they had safety but also access to law. And therefore Baroness Chakrabarty's amendment simply ensures that Parliament fulfils that role and certainly isn't a wrecking amendment.
Minister Michael Tomlinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to you, and with leave of the House, I would like to make a few remarks. I fear I don't have time to respond to each and every point that has been made, but I thank right honourable members right across the House for the contributions they have made. I want to pick up on one, and that's the intervention from my right honourable friend, the member for Wokingham, on the shadow minister, because the shadow minister can't actually say what they would do. He says he has a plan, but all they can say they would do is exactly what the government is doing already. That's what they're saying they would do. They said they would scrap the Rwanda scheme. Even when it is up and running, they haven't found a deterrent. Worse than that, directly in response to the intervention from my right honourable friend, the member for Wokingham, in response to the intervention from my honourable friend, the member for East Worthing and Shoreham, and my honourable friend, the member for Torbay previously, it is incumbent on anyone, Madam Deputy Speaker, who disagrees with this policy to come up with their own solution to the problem of how we should deal with people who enter the country with no legitimate credible case for claiming asylum and who cannot be returned to their home country. And answer to that intervention, as ever, came there none from the Labour Party. Madam Deputy Speaker, letting this bill now pass will enable us to send a clear signal. You will not be able to stay if you enter this country illegally. You will be detained and swiftly returned to your home country or to a safe third country, namely Rwanda. I urge this House once again to send a strong message back to the other place. These amendments are not necessary. I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1D. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby. Order! The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1D. As matters that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tell us for the ayes, Manda Soloway and Mike Wood. Tell us for the noes, Mary Glindon and Christian Wakeford.
Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 240.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 240. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Order. Under the programme order of the 18th of March, I must now put the questions necessary to bring to a conclusion proceedings on the Lord's message. We now come to Lord's Amendment 3E. Minister to move the motion to disagree formally. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 3E. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Vision, clear the lobby. Order. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 3E. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Amanda Soloway, Mike Wood. Tell us for the noes, Mary Glendon and Christian Wakefield. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 240.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 240. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. We now come to Lord's Amendment 6D. Minister to move the motion to disagree formally.
I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 6D. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. Order. Order. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 6D. As many of that have been say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Mike Wood. Amanda Soloway. Tell us for the noes, Christian Wakefield and Mary Glendon. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 310. The noes to the left, 240.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 310. The noes to the left, 240. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. And finally, we now come to Lord's Amendment 10D. Minister to move the motion to disagree formally.
I beg to move.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 10D. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! No vision. Clear the lobby. Order. Order. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 10D. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Mike Wood, Amanda Soloway. Tellers for the noes, Christian Wakeford and Mary Glendon. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 302. The noes to the left, 244.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 302. The noes to the left, 244. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Are not. Minister, to move that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons.
I beg to move that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendments. That Michael Tomlinson, Scott Mann, Kieran Mullen, James Sunderland, Stephen Kinnock, Colleen Fletcher and Alison Thewliss be members of the committee. That Michael Tomlinson be the chair of the committee. That 3 be the quorum of the committee. And that the committee do withdraw immediately.
Very good. The question is that a committee be appointed to draw up reasons to be assigned to the Lords for disagreeing to their amendments 1D, 3E, 6D and 10D. That Michael Tomlinson, Scott Mann, Kieran Mullen, James Sunderland, Stephen Kinnock, Colleen Fletcher and Alison Thewliss be members of the committee. That Michael Tomlinson be the chair of the committee. That 3 be the quorum of the committee and that the committee do withdraw immediately. As may I then say aye? Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And that concludes consideration of the Lord's message relating to the safety of Rwanda asylum and immigration bill.
Finance number 2 bill, second reading.